You know that feeling when a small annoyance spirals into something completely out of control? When one tiny thing becomes the straw that breaks everything. Imagine if that one tiny thing actually started a war, not a metaphorical conflict, not a diplomatic tension that fizzles out, but an actual honest-to-goodness military invasion that cost lives, displaced families, and nearly dragged multiple European powers into a continental crisis. This is what happened in 1925 in the Balkans, and the entire thing started because of a stray dog crossing a border. You're probably thinking that's impossible. That's absurd. That's the kind of story people make up at parties to seem interesting. But I'm telling you right now, this actually happened, and when you understand how, you'll see something terrifying about the world you live in today. Because this war didn't start because of a dog. The dog was just the match, the real fuel. It was decades of tension, competing nationalisms, humiliation, poverty, and the kind of political desperation that makes normal people do insane things. So here's what's about to happen in the next few minutes. I'm going to take you to the border between Greece and Bulgaria in September 1925. I'm going to show you the exact moment everything fell apart. But more importantly, I'm going to show you why this matters to you right now. Because the forces that triggered this conflict, they haven't gone away. They're still at work in the world today, just wearing different uniforms. And if you don't understand them, you won't see them coming when they appear in your own backyard. Let's rewind. Let's go back to the early 1920s in the Balkans. This region had just emerged from the wreckage of World War I and the Ottoman Empire. Borders were being redrawn, nations were being born, and everyone was angry. Greece had just won a massive military campaign against Turkey. They pushed deep into Anatolia, convinced that they could reclaim ancient Greek territories. But then Turkey pushed back, hard. The Greco-Turkish War of 1909 to 1922 was absolutely devastating. Hundreds of thousands died, entire cities burned, and in the end, Greece lost. They lost big. Over 1 million Greeks were forced to flee Turkey. They poured into Greece, into cities already packed, into countryside already stretched thin for resources. Can you imagine that? Imagine your entire nation suddenly swelling with over 1 million desperate refugees. Imagine the housing crisis. Imagine the food shortages. Imagine the psychological weight of national humiliation. That's what Greece was carrying in 1925. Bulgaria, meanwhile, had its own scars. Bulgaria had fought on the wrong side in World War I. They'd allied with Austria-Hungary and Germany, and when those empires fell, Bulgaria fell with them. They'd lost territories. They'd been forced to pay reparations. They were economically broken and geopolitically isolated. The Bulgarian government was unstable, cycling through weak leaders and military factions who all blamed each other for the nation's collapse. And between them, a border. A long, winding border through Macedonian territory that had been officially drawn up in 1923 by International Commission. But, and this is crucial, nobody was happy with that border. Greeks thought it should be further east. Bulgarians thought it should be further west. And the local people who actually lived on that border, they didn't much care about the official lines drawn by diplomats in distant capitals. This is the tinderbox we're talking about. This is the explosive atmosphere. All it needed was a spark. And on September 19, 1925, that spark arrived. A Greek soldier was patrolling the border near a place called Petric. The exact details are muddled by history. History often is, but what we know is this. A dog crossed the border. Not a pack of dogs. Not an invasion of wild animals. Just one single dog. Maybe it was chasing something. Maybe it was just wandering. Maybe it didn't even realize there was a border at all. How could a dog know? Dogs don't read maps. But that dog crossed from Bulgarian territory into Greek territory. And the Greek soldier, following what he believed were his orders, shot the dog dead. Now, stop for a moment. Take that in. A soldier killed a dog for crossing an imaginary line on the map. In the grand scheme of things, it's almost comically tragic. But here's the thing, that dead dog became a symbol. It became proof. It became ammunition in an argument that had been building for years. Bulgarian officials seized on the incident immediately. This wasn't just a dog being killed, they said. This was a Greek provocation. This was Greek aggression. This was Greek disrespect for Bulgarian sovereignty. The Bulgarian media ran with it. Newspapers screamed about Greek imperialism. Political figures gave fiery speeches about protecting national honor. And you need to understand something about 1925 Bulgaria. The country was in political chaos. There was a communist party trying to seize power. There were military factions jostling for control. The government was desperately looking for something, anything that could unify the nation and rally people behind the leadership. Because in times of crisis, when people are poor and scared and angry, nothing unites them faster than an external enemy. So imagine you're a Bulgarian military leader in September 1925. Your country is falling apart. Communists are plotting in the streets. The economy is shattered, people losing faith in the government. And then, perfect timing, you get this Greek provocation, this violation of Bulgarian sovereignty. This moment where you can stand up and say, "We are strong. We will not be disrespected. We will defend our nation." What if I told you that's exactly the calculation that was made? Because it was. Bulgarian military commanders saw an opportunity. They saw a way to look strong, to distract from internal problems, to consolidate power through nationalism. And so they made a decision that would change everything. They decided to invade Greek territory. On September 19th, 1925, the same day as the dog incident, or maybe a few days after, the timeline gets fuzzy. Bulgarian troops began crossing into Greece. Not a probe, not a small incursion, but an actual military invasion. Soldiers, armed with rifles and machine guns, marching across the border to seize Greek land. The Greeks, caught off guard, responded. They mobilized their forces and began pushing back. What started as a border skirmish rapidly escalated into open warfare. Soldiers were dying. Villages were being burned. People were fleeing their homes in terror. But here's where it gets interesting. Because other nations started paying attention, the international community began to get nervous. France had interests in the region, so did Italy, and they all watched anxiously as the situation spiraled. Can you feel the stakes rising? Can you sense how quickly things got out of hand? A dog dies, and within days, soldiers are dying. Within weeks, international powers are mobilizing. Within months, there's potential for a much larger conflict. The Bulgarian invasion lasted about 10 days before they were forced to retreat. Greek forces, mobilized more quickly and effectively than expected, pushed the Bulgarian army back across the border. By late September, it was over. The invasion had failed. But the damage was done. Hundreds had died, exact numbers are disputed, but we're talking easily several hundred soldiers and civilians. Thousands were displaced. And both nations were now more hostile, more suspicious, more convinced that the other side wanted to destroy them. The League of Nations got involved. They condemned the Bulgarian invasion. They imposed economic sanctions on Bulgaria. Bulgaria was forced to pay reparations to Greece. It was a humiliation for Bulgaria, which only deepened the anger and resentment that had sparked the conflict in the first place. But here's what I want you to understand. Here's what I need to hammer home because it's so important for understanding our world today. This war never would have happened if Bulgaria and Greece had both been stable, prosperous, and confident in their futures. Think about that for a second. The dog didn't cause the war. The dead dog was just an excuse. The real cause was decades of humiliation, economic despair, political instability, and desperation. When people are comfortable, when they have jobs, when they have hope, they don't invade their neighbors. But when they're broken, when they're scared, when their leaders are desperate to stay in power, then a dead dog becomes a symbol of national honor that must be avenged. This is a pattern you'll see repeated throughout history. The Spanish Inquisition didn't happen because of religious doctrine. It happened because Spain was weak and needed to consolidate power. World War I didn't happen because of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. He was just the spark. It happened because Europe was a powder keg of competing empires, military machines, and nationalist fervor. And what's chilling, what's absolutely bone-chilling, is that the same conditions exist in parts of the world today. Think about regions right now where you see weak governments struggling for legitimacy, populations living in poverty and despair, competing nationalisms and ethnic tensions, military factions with their own agendas, and borders that everyone agrees are wrong, but nobody can agree on how to fix them. These are the conditions for another war of the stray dog, not necessarily called that. It might be called something else. It might start with a different spark, but the underlying dynamics are identical. Now, let me tell you about the actual human cost of the 1925 war, because this is where history stops being abstract and becomes deeply personally real. Imagine you're a farmer in a village near the border. You've lived your whole life on this land. Your family has lived here for generations. Your home is modest, but it's yours. You have a small plot of land where you grow crops. You have animals. You have a routine. Every day is similar to the last. It's not exciting, but it's stable. Then one day, soldiers show up at your door. Bulgarian soldiers or Greek soldiers or whoever is advancing through your area. They tell you to leave. You need to evacuate immediately. There's going to be fighting here. You need to get your family to safety. What do you take? What do you grab in those frantic minutes? Do you take your family photos? Do you take documents? Do you take your most valuable possessions? But you can only carry so much. Your home, everything you built, you're leaving it behind. And you run with your family, with your elderly parents, with your children who don't understand what's happening. You run toward safety, toward a refugee camp, or toward relatives in a city where you don't know anyone, where you have no job prospects and no resources. And you never go back. The fighting ends, and officially the war is over, but your home is destroyed, your land is damaged, your life is shattered, and nobody will ever compensate you for it. Nobody will ever truly acknowledge the violence done to you. This happened to thousands of people as a result of the War of the Stray Dog. This isn't an exaggeration. This is documented historical fact. Entire villages were depopulated. Families were displaced. Generational trauma was created that rippled through families for decades. But it wasn't even the main story. Because while Bulgaria was suffering from the League of Nations sanctions and Greece was dealing with the refugees and the destruction, something else was happening across Europe. The 1920s were the height of political instability in the continent. Communism was on the rise. Fascism was on the rise. Democracy was struggling in numerous countries. In fact, the instability in Bulgaria that had sparked the war in the first place didn't get better. It got worse. Military factions took control. Coups happened. The government fell. And eventually, Bulgaria would align itself with Nazi Germany in World War II, a choice that would devastate the nation again in just a few years. This is the tragedy that historians often overlook. The War of the Stray Dog isn't just a quirky historical footnote. It's a window into how fragile civilization is, how quickly order can collapse, how easily leaders can manufacture conflict to consolidate power, how a single incident can cascade into destruction, affecting thousands of lives. Do you see the connection to today? Do you see how the same psychological patterns and political mechanics are still operating? Right now, today, in the world you live in, there are dozens of border disputes. There are regions where nationalism is rising. There are populations living in despair. There are governments struggling for legitimacy. And there are military factions who would love to have a crisis they could use to consolidate power and rally their people. What if tomorrow, at a disputed border somewhere, a stray dog crosses, or a fisherman wanders slightly too far, or a disputed incident happens that both sides interpret differently? And what if a military commander sees that as an opportunity, as a pretext to prove strength, to distract from internal problems, to rally nationalist sentiment? You're probably thinking, but surely we're more sophisticated than that now. Surely we have international institutions and diplomatic channels that would prevent something like the 1925 War of the Stray Dog from happening again. Here's the hard truth. We have those things, yes, but they only work when people want them to work. When leaders are genuinely interested in peace and stability, international institutions help. But when a leader is desperate, when they're facing internal collapse or loss of power, those institutions become obstacles to overcome, not guardrails to respect. Let me tell you what happened in the days right after the Bulgarian retreat from Greek territory in 1925, because this is important. This shows you what preventing escalation looks like. Greece could have pursued the Bulgarian forces back into Bulgaria. They could have invaded Bulgaria proper, attempting to seize territory and expand their own nation at Bulgaria's expense. Militarily, they might have been able to do it, but they didn't. Why? Because they understood the risks. They understood that if Greece invaded Bulgaria, then France or other powers might get involved to maintain the balance of power. The conflict could spiral beyond anyone's control. So instead, Greece pushed the Bulgarian forces back across the border and then stopped. They didn't pursue further. They held the line. They exercised restraint. Similarly, Bulgaria, humiliated and defeated, wanted revenge. They wanted to regroup and try again. But they couldn't because the international community was watching. The League of Nations had essentially said, if you do this again, there will be serious consequences. It wasn't a perfect system, but it was enough to prevent immediate re-escalation. This is actually how most conflicts stay localized. It's not because everyone loves peace and wants harmony. It's because there are costs to escalation that outweigh the benefits. It's because there are red lines that even desperate leaders won't cross because they understand the consequences. But what happens when those red lines blur? What happens when leaders believe they can escalate without consequences? Or what happens when the cost of not escalating seems higher than the cost of escalating? That's when you get World War I. That's when you get World War II. That's when you get conflicts that spiral beyond anyone's ability to control them. Now, I want to bring this back to the original question. How did a dead dog really start a war? And here's my answer. A dead dog didn't start a war. Desperation started a war. Humiliation started a war. Weak government and strong nationalism started a war. The dead dog was just the excuse that made the war politically acceptable. This is a crucial distinction, because if you think wars are started by random incidents, by stray dogs and accidental shots, then you'll always be shocked when they happen. You'll always think, this came out of nowhere. But if you understand that wars are started by the combination of desperation, weak institutions, nationalism, and a convenient excuse, then you can see them coming. You can spot the warning signs before they materialize. And right now, today, we're seeing those warning signs in multiple regions around the world. We're seeing governments in trouble. We're seeing nationalist movements rising. We're seeing populations in despair. We're seeing new borders being disputed and old territorial claims being revived. This is exactly the environment where the next war of the stray dog could happen. Think about it. What if tomorrow a small incident happened at a disputed border? What if both sides interpreted it as an attack? What if nationalist politicians in one country seized on it as proof that the other side was aggressive? And what if the military leadership, seeing an opportunity to consolidate power or distract from internal problems, decided to push back hard? Could it escalate into a larger conflict? Could neighboring countries get drawn in? Could it threaten to destabilize an entire region? The answer is yes. Absolutely yes, because the underlying conditions are there, because human nature hasn't changed. Because desperation and nationalism are still powerful forces, because leaders are still willing to wage war to maintain power. So what's the lesson here? What are we supposed to take away from the 1925 War of the Stray Dog? Part of the lesson is about humility. It's about recognizing that we're not as civilized as we think we are, that beneath the surface of modern society, beneath our technology and institutions and education, we're still capable of generating the kind of desperate, nationalist, violent behavior that led Bulgaria to invade Greece over a dead dog. But part of the lesson is also about hope, because the war of the stray dog stayed local. It didn't spiral into a continental conflict. It didn't drag the major powers into a war that killed millions. Why? Because there were mechanisms to stop it. Because there were a cost to escalation. because ultimately both sides recognize that the conflict wasn't worth the price. That's the line we're walking right now. Every day, humanity is walking a line between stability and chaos. Most days, we stay on the stable side, but sometimes, just sometimes, something tips the balance. And then you get the war of the stray dog, or you get something worse. And I think if you really understand that, if you really feel the fragility of the stability we live in, then you start paying more attention. You start reading about international relations. You start understanding geopolitics. You start seeing the warning signs before they become wars, because knowledge is power. And if you understand how wars start, if you understand that they're usually not about the supposed cause, but about the underlying conditions, then you can start asking the right questions when you see those conditions developing in the world around you. What regions have desperation? What governments are weak? Where is nationalism rising? Where are borders disputed? Where could a dead dog, metaphorically speaking, become an excuse for something much larger? These are the questions that matter. These are the questions that could help humanity avoid the next catastrophe. The 1925 War of the Stray Dog is often dismissed as a historical curiosity, a funny story to tell at parties, but it's so much more than that. It's a window into human nature. It's a warning. It's a lesson that we keep having to learn over and over again because we keep forgetting it. Borders are real but fragile. Nations are built on shared stories and shared identity, but those can be weaponized instantly. Peace is the default state, but it's only maintained through constant effort and cost. And war can start from almost nothing, from a dead dog, from a disputed incident, from a moment of weakness that a desperate leader can exploit. This is the world you live in. This is the world that created the War of the Stray Dog in 1925. And until something fundamental changes about human nature, until leaders stop being desperate and nations stop being fragile and nationalism stops being powerful, these conditions will keep existing. So pay attention, stay informed, understand the warning signs, and maybe, just maybe, we can prevent the next war before the first dog even crosses the border.